In this video, I want to use the recording of a cardboard to create an interesting organic impact sound, thinking of something crunchy like maybe a stone impact or stones crumbling. And this is the recording that I think might work quite well for this. I always like to use these cardboard rip sounds because they contain usually interesting movement, also some pitch movement, some pitch variation, and they're a nice source to create interesting textures. So at first I want to bring some more movement into this, mainly pitch movement, and then I'm just going to enhance the sound, probably with saturation and transient enhancement, transient shaping, and then this is going to be the source to create our impact sound. So let's maybe start by pitching this down a bit. I don't want to pitch it too low, but I think it still works at this pitch. So let's keep it like that. Then in this case, I'm going to use grain delay for some modulation. It's just something that I really like to play around with a lot. And it can create really interesting pitch movement. So I really like the movement up here in this area, in this frequency range. I'm only changing frequency and pitch here. So I think in this case we can just use two LFOs, assign one to the pitch and one to the frequency, and then just restrict movement to this area up here. Maybe around here. I think this can work. So now let's start enhancing the sound. Let's first compress it a bit. I'm just using a fuse compressor here. And then let's just use Orion for a bit more extreme processing. I really want to bring the sound up, the details out. Also push the low end quite a bit. And after this, let's just use Enforcer here. I just want to have some more punchy individual hits in there. Let's tighten this up with this disperser. Don't need to use the most extreme settings. I think this works. And now just some transient shaping. Let's use Trans X, and I want to focus a bit on the mids here. And then maybe use another instance just to focus a bit more on the crunchiness in the highs. With a limiter at the end, and I think we can go on with this and record it. And so due to these LFOs down here, each time we record this, it's going to sound a bit different. So it can make sense to go back to this and just record it a couple of times. So you just get slight variations each time. And of course, you can also record a couple of variations without grain delay at different pitches and stuff like this if you need to have more source material essentially. But for now, I'm going to move on with this one, and we don't need these two tracks anymore. I'm just going to create a group for us to layer the sounds in. And I'm just going to drag this down here. And now we can work within this group. So I'm just gonna choose one spot, like for example here. I know that this is where the main impact is gonna be, so everything afterwards is gonna be the tail. And here we have some movement into the sound. And now I'm just gonna listen through this and look for interesting parts that I think might work well for the movement, the whoosh into this, or the tail, or as the transient, the impact. For example, this I think is some nice movement into this. This one as well. Maybe use this here. We can already move this into the transient section. I think I can also use this here as the tail, maybe pitch it down a bit. Can use this one as a more clicky high-end impact here. And I'm actually also just going to create a copy of this sound and pitch the entire thing down just so it's easier for me to see which section might sound interesting at a lower pitch. Yeah, this part I think is good until this more high-end squelchy thing comes in. This could be good for the tail as well. Let's also use one of these parts, the down-pitched ones, for the movement into it. And of course you can also use the same sections at different pitches and at different parts in the sound. You kind of want to layer a couple of sounds just to get a more interesting texture, more variation, more movement in there. Okay, now this is a nice basis, I think, but for a bit more texture and movement, it can make sense to use some granular processing, of course. So in this case, I'm just going to use current for this, but you can use any granular processing you like. I just like the granular section in current a lot. I've just pulled the long file that we've created here, the enhanced version, into this. So now we can play around with this. I just want this to be really random. So I'm just increase the tempo here. Position doesn't really matter. Add more layers. I think for this the strike pattern makes sense. And I think we can also introduce some pitch movement here, but I don't want this to be too audible, too obvious. So let's make it rather slow and just 1 octave, and I don't really want this to start at a too high pitch. And now let's just enhance this a bit in the effects section. Let's compress this. And then distort it. Compress this a bit more. And then maybe add another distortion unit. And so let's just record this. And we can also play around with different pitches while recording this. Okay, so this is fine. I think now we can use this just as another layer, pull this entire file down here, and I think the main sound is obviously gonna be this one. Doesn't have to be that long, so let's see how this works in context. And we can actually make it a bit longer here. We can also use a section of this here. So this is more the steady movement, and with these layers up here, we bring in a bit more randomness. Reduce the volume of these a bit. Just want to clean this area up a bit. I don't think I really need this, so I'm just going to remove it. And we can also just quickly process this entire group. Clean up the low end a bit. Also maybe use something like pusher. If you want more low end, I would probably just enhance this rumble layer down here. And we can also use basement on the entire group, just for adding some clarity here. And now with this as a basis, you can start creating different versions. So for example, depending on the direction you want to go into with the sound, you could just, for example, create a copy of this one and affect this one a bit differently. And for example, use something like manipulator on there, just really quick, but just if you wanted to go more into a direction like this. Just deactivate this layer. And of course you could also do something that's a bit more impactful, like let's maybe create a bit of space in front of this and then just add another track for this additional transient maybe. Let's just use enforcer in this. let's maybe use a different one. Maybe remove these guys down here. Just process this a bit differently. You can do some more extreme processing maybe with, let's just shape this a bit more. We could also use one of the other parts, the lower ones, as an additional layer. I mean, on this one, maybe you want to cut the high end. And of course, you can also make, use something like Hybrid Filter or Filter Freak or Volcano. They can all do the same thing. And of course, just add more stuff, switch out layers, record more variations of this so you have different source material. And of course, you can also go into a completely different direction. Just a quick tutorial. Hope this helps you and gives you some inspiration on how you can play around with this kind of stuff. Let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully see you in the next one, and take care.